Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the Sacramento Law Library for this opportunity to give the basics of the naturalization process. I actually joke with my staff, this is actually my favorite part of my immigration practice because this should be the end of the journey. And I always joke with my clients that after this, you'll probably never see me again and enjoy that US passport. But at the same time, we also try to tell our clients that, we can't celebrate all the way until the very end. Only because the type of cases that we deal with involve some sort of complication. And so we'll discuss those complications in a little bit. And the audience that we want to try to assist in this are folks that are about to take their citizenship test. So they should expect the type of questions that will be asked at the interview and just get a general idea of the process. In addition to the basic process, I think it's also helpful that I discuss some legal issues that we see every day. And this is mostly why our clients retain us, is to discuss the criminal issues or the fraudulent allegations that could come up. So let's start with just the 5-step basic process. And the process starts with the filing of the N400 application. If we go to the USCIS website, you want to go to www.uscis.gov, and you could get the forms directly from the government website. A lot of people get tricked into a lot of services that they believe are government services, but the reality is they're trying to ask you for a fee. They're giving you old forms. The best bet is to go to the government website, go to uscis.gov, click on forms, and there is just an unbelievable amount of basic information to start the process. And so if we go to forms and click on the button, we are going to scroll all the way down to the N400 application. And I know this may seem basic, but I've had a lot of clients pay an ungodly amount of money to pick up forms that are essentially free from the government's website. So we click all the way down to the N400 form, and I won't go through it, but I would just want to show how user-friendly this is. You could file online. We don't, just because we typically handle complicated cases. The simple stuff, maybe you could certainly file online and be a lot easier. There's a helpful eligibility button that could give you an idea of how long you need to be a green card holder, or how many years you need to be a green card holder if you got your green card through asylum, where to file, the address, and very, very straightforward, the fees and everything else. So grab the N400 form directly off the government website. Okay, so after we get the form, we put it together, and the way we like to put it together is you fill out the form A to Z, you sign it, try to type it. It looks a little bit more professional, a little bit easier to the USCIS officer that's looking at the form. Right after the form, a copy of your green card front and back. Right after that green card, if, for example, if you had issues with a criminal conviction, those documents need to be there. If you got your green card through marriage, typically will include evidence of that marriage right after the green card. And right at the top, the most important part, that check made out to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security for $725. Okay, so once we file it, send it regular mail, keep a copy of it. Right now we're seeing the biometrics appointment taking a while. Usually before COVID, it was about 4 to 6 weeks. Now it's turning into several months. So the step 2 is, once you receive your receipt notice and your fingerprint appointment, you attend that, and then it's just a waiting point. So the biometrics appointment, again, is just an opportunity for the government to retake your fingerprints, take a picture of you. It's a 10-minute situation, just like what you may have experienced at the green card level, and out you go. You don't need the lawyer, you don't need to be nervous, take IDs, and that's essentially it. So after the wait time, typically it should be 6 months. Hopefully after the COVID delays, it will get to that 6 month period. You go to the naturalization interview. So if you live in the Sacramento area, it will be in downtown Sacramento at the USCIS building. Most of you green card holders know where that's at, and so there's no issue there. And so the point of this presentation is to actually assist you as to what to expect at the interview. So we'll get into that detail, but if everything goes well and you get an approval, you'll get your decision in the mail that your case is approved. You'll get your oath ceremony. You have to go to your oath ceremony, and that'll be that. You could apply for your U.S. passport there, and hopefully after that, you will never have to talk to an immigration lawyer again. Okay, legal issues to consider before filing. First of all, you have to be 18 years old. One thing that really trips people up is you have to figure out how you got your green card. Did you get your green card through marriage, or did you get it through an investment, or did you get it through asylum? That's the most important thing you have to figure out. If you got it through marriage, you have to be a green card holder for 3 years and have to stay within the marital union for that time, and then you could apply for U.S. citizenship. Typically within the 90-day, before the 90-day anniversary of that 3-year period. If you're a green card holder, for example, if you got your green card through asylum, it's a 5-year wait. And criminal convictions, we'll be discussing that later, according to the slide. Unpaid taxes is one of the things you have to consider. If you owe taxes, that might be an issue at the interview. And so the officer will ask you, do you owe any unpaid taxes? A month ago, one of our clients had an issue that they filed incorrectly. And so that came up in the interview. And unfortunately, that delayed our process. So figure out if you owe unpaid taxes. Have you served in the military? There's some leeway with that, and some boxes you will have to check in the N-400 application, such as if you ever received weapons training or anything like that. Selective service. Males between the ages of 18 and 26 have to register for selective service or provide a status and information at the interview. So if you haven't done that, I would recommend going on to the selective service website and just show your good intent. That, you know, a lot of times our clients never apply for selective service, and they retain us later. And so we look at that and ask them, like, you know, did you ever apply? And they get freaked out. But reality is, if you go onto the website, show that you didn't intentionally avoid this requirement, that will save the day. Okay. So this next slide is essentially the main reason why clients retain me or an attorney, and that's because of the good moral character requirement. Generally, the USCIS officer bases their recommendation as to the alien's good moral character on the 5 years preceding the application. So, in other words, if you had a criminal conviction, or if you had an arrest, or any issue with the police here in the United States or in the home country, that's going to come up. The biggest misconception that people will think is, well, I got an expungement, and therefore it shouldn't show up, Mr. Outwell, and that's incorrect. The federal government will not forgive that, sort of say, and they will not overlook a conviction because you had a expungement. So everything is fair game. So that's part of the biometrics. The reasoning behind the biometrics portion of it is when they take your fingerprints, your entire rap sheet will show up in the United States. But there have been instances where some of our clients were arrested in the home country. And so that'll be asked. And unfortunately, the officer might say, well, I need records of that. And by the way, I need the original records of that. So you need to be mindful of that. In addition to the 5-year requirement, they could also look past that and look at something that happened 20 years ago. So we've had cases where we've gone into the interview and there was a conviction of burglary, for example, in the 80s, where a young kid was caught with narcotics, and so that definitely comes into play. So always take a look at your criminal convictions. So much so, to protect myself, I have to always, in my fee agreement, tell my client that if you are applying for naturalization, there's a good chance you might trigger removal proceedings. And that might sound scary because some people think, well, hey, you know what? I won my case, I got my green card, I'm clean now, I've got a good record. But the reality is, any major criminal conviction could trigger removal proceedings, especially crimes involving moral turpitude, CIMT crimes, aggravated felonies, drug or fraud charges. There's a whole subset that one could look into on just a criminal conviction part of things. And it's a monthly, weekly changing situation because there's case law that might overrule an old case. And so if you have a criminal conviction, not trying to sell legal services, but speak to an attorney. And if you can't, at minimum, do your research by going onto a great source such as the Immigration Legal Resources website, ILRC, who has the ILRC actually has a great chart for convictions. And you could take a look at all types of convictions, whether it be a misdemeanor DUI or a felony DUI or possession of marijuana. So all these things have to be taken into consideration, because if you had a drug charge as a teenager, or you had an issue after the age of 18, you have to take a look at the conviction and what happened in the conviction. How long was the jail sentence for? What was the punishment for that conviction? And that all comes into play in the GMC requirement. And so part of that GMC issue is then to prove that you're a person of good moral character. And so a lot of times we'll tell our client, look, we got to present to the USCIS that you are a person of good moral character. And how do you do that? You can show your taxes, which we like to do. If you're a well-to-do teacher or a engineer, and now you make a decent amount of money, you're a tax-paying person that's never defaulted on or don't have any unpaid taxes, that's a great thing that we like to use. Pictures of the family, showing your kids or your spouse to show that you're a changed person, you're a family person. And the most important thing a lot of times that we will include is a sworn declaration explaining what happened. Explaining that, you know what, this is what happened, it was a stupid mistake, this is what was going on in my life, and at least trying to offer an explanation as to what happened. And a lot of times I'll tell my client, look, don't try to deny it. I mean, of course you could deny it if you didn't do it, but the reality is you've had that fight. You either pled to it or you were guilty of it, you served your time. You have to at least tell the officer the truth as to what happened. So we'll include a sworn declaration, usually right in the front, because that's the most important part that I think is something that needs to be presented. So in addition to that, obviously, then you have to provide your criminal documents. It could be court records. It could be the California Department of Justice rap sheet or an FBI rap sheet. So you're presenting your situation to the USCIS officer. I said could be on the court records. That's incorrect. It's actually you have to. you have to bring your original court records to the officer for review. A lot of clients will say, well, Mr. Alwell, what was the point of them doing the biometrics? This is the federal government. Don't they know all this stuff? Don't they have my criminal history? And the answer is yes, they do. But they want to ask you what happened. They want you to bring the original court documents. And 75% of the time, our clients will say, I don't have those records. I mean, that was a painful time in my life. I have no idea where those original documents went. And so the difficult part of retrieving those records is you have to then go to the county where the conviction occurred and request your records. And most of the times, the county superior court will say, we don't have these records. They've been thrown away or discarded. You might have to go to the archives and pull it up that way. But most of the time, the court clerk will offer a letter with a stamp on it that will say these records aren't available. And so you need to take that original letter to the interview. And so that is one of the biggest complaints that we hear too from our clients is, oh man, yeah, I really don't want to go to LA County to pick these records up, but you have to. And you will literally waste 3 months if you don't have those records at the interview because they will be asked. Other side issues, and we'll go a little bit more into the criminal conviction part of things in the next slides, but the other issue is do I have to take the English and the civics test? And so if you are able to prove that, I mean, you've been a green card holder for 20 years and you're 50 years and older, there's certain exemptions that you can qualify for. There's a 65-20 exemption that you may qualify for. If you reach the age of 65 and been a green card holder for 20 years, you don't have to take you don't have the same requirements. You could have the simplified version of the civics test. One aspect that we've been approached by, which we don't do too much, is maybe doing a medical exemption. So if you have a mental issue or you have some sort of medical problem that doesn't allow you to study and read and write in English, that could be filled out by your physician. And again, that form could be found on the USCIS website. So everything's there. A lot of times we direct our staff to go, any new staff member, we tell them go to the USCIS website and get acclimated with the form. So if you have issues with reading, writing, and speaking English, then take a look at the exemption list. Okay, the actual interview. So after you file the N-400, after you paid your fees, after you've done the biometrics, after you've gone through that miserably long wait, you get the interview. You get the interview at the USCIS building, and here at the field office, here it's in 650 Capitol Mall. TSA security, when you enter, don't take all your jewelry. I usually tell my clients, dress business casual. I mean, you're presenting yourself as a person of good moral character, then dress upon. So you enter the building, you check in. A lot of people that didn't have that process and didn't get their green card here at the USCIS building, that's where you go. And you sit in the waiting room with a bunch of other nervous people, 20-minute wait, and then you get called in. The officer brings you in. It's a small room. You raise your right hand, promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And then you have a seat, present your IDs, and then the interview starts. Usually, the officer will take a look at your IDs, probably have read my legal argument or reviewed the legal documents beforehand, if it's a complicated case. And then the officer will start with the civics test. The civics test, the English test, and then get into the actual form. And they'll go line by line, name, address. Do you want to change your legal name? So that's the other option that you have, is if you want to change your legal name, you have the opportunity. I've not had the opportunity to have a client changed their name recently just because there aren't too many federal judges there at this point, and so you have the opportunity, but I actually haven't seen that go to work where you could actually change your legal name. And then it's all the questions on the N400 that will be asked, such as your parents' legal immigration status, all the trips that you've taken out of the United States in the last 5 years. And so some clients have that issue where they got their green card, they don't really particularly care to live here permanently, and so they go back and forth, and they don't hit the residency requirement of 913 days of in a 5-year scenario. And so take a look at that. Make sure you calculate how many days you lived in the United States, and that could be asked. The other thing that trips clients up is weapons trainings. Surprisingly, a lot of folks have received military training because it's required in the home country, so that has to be answered. And the rest is just your simple questions of, have you been involved in any terrorist activity or prostitution or illegal gambling, or are you a habitual do you habitually drink alcohol? And that actually comes up quite a bit in my DUI cases. So we've handled cases where somebody's had up to 3 DUIs and is applying for citizenship. And again, for the attorneys out there, you have to protect yourself and say you could trigger removal proceedings. If there was an issue with vehicular manslaughter, or if there was an issue where somebody was drinking and driving and hit somebody. So, and then the good moral character part plays after the fact. So the officer will go through the forms, and then that's pretty much it. But onto the next slide, where we're going to discuss how a lot of our clients get tripped up. And I'd say 25% of my practice is where everybody sees these videos, they think they've done all this great internet research, they fill out the form themselves, they present it, but on the day of the interview, all the old skeletons come out of the closet. And people have this happy-go-lucky feeling, and then all of a sudden it blows up in the interview. And the number one issue that we see sometimes is the marriage cases. The applicant got their green card through marriage. They got their 2-year green card. Everything went fine with the marriage. They filed the 751 removal of condition form, and then they got the 10-year green card. And right when they got that 10-year green card, they filed a divorce. And they thought they were scot-free. And then when they went to the USCIS N400 interview, the officer asked, "So what happened in your marriage? Why'd you get a divorce so quickly after the green card? What happened? Did you guys have kids?" That's the first question, to see, was it a fraudulent marriage? Did you guys have kids? No? Okay, well, did you guys have assets? Well, not really. We lived in an apartment and we separated. Okay, well, did you guys travel together? Did you guys file taxes? Do you guys have joint bank accounts? Obviously, they wouldn't have gave you the 10-year green card if you didn't answer those questions, but all of a sudden, this happy, fun civics test that people were getting nervous about now is turned into the officer really asking whether that marriage was real in the first place. And after that bad news, that's when the client will come to us and say, "Oh my God, I couldn't believe what happened at the interview. The officer started asking me about the past." And then they might even get a denial letter that says, "Hey, we looked at your case. As soon as you got your green card, you filed for a divorce." Or we talked to your ex, and he said, we stopped living right after we filed or right before we filed. And so they're looking at what happened. And so be mindful of that. Be mindful of how you got your green card. Don't celebrate until you got your U.S. passport in hand. And a lot of people will say, "Well, I've applied, and therefore I should be good." But that's that's where a lot of people get caught, is looking at the past marriage. On that same note, last week we had a client that retained us because his old asylum situation came up. Everything was beautiful. Every question was great. The guy had a clean record. He's paying a bunch of taxes. He's a family man. But when the officer said, wait a minute, you went back to the home country that you were arguing you were being persecuted from in your asylum application, what happened there? So recall, an asylum application is where you present your case and argue that if I go back to the home country, that I'll be persecuted. I might be killed because of my issues with the police or politicians or whatever the case may be. If you got your green card through asylum and then you go back to the home country, that's the other option of really getting into hot water. So they will pull up your old asylum application and ask you. We see that you went 3 times after you got your green card to the country you were scared of. Well, why? And then people start mumbling, and then they get nervous, and they try to get out of Dodge as quickly as possible. But that denial letter will then document how many times you went. And if you maybe spoke to an attorney, or if you kind of did your research, some people will argue, hey, it's changed circumstances. It was dangerous 20 years ago, but things are fine now. Or it was dangerous 5 years ago, but things are fine now. Or Russia, for example, it was dangerous in one area for me, but it wasn't dangerous on the other side. Or the same thing with India. I live in the north side, but when I took my trip, I actually went to the south side. But I mean, if you come that prepared, good for you, because you'll hopefully dodge that major bullet. And that's the first thing I ask. That's the first thing I ask when I meet a client is, how did you get your green card? You got it through marriage? Okay. Are you still with that spouse? No? Okay. Well, now I might need to go with you to the interview and sit right next to you and make sure things don't go out of line, because they might. And they're not there to test you on who the first president of the United States was. They're there to catch the possibility of fraud. And so please be mindful of that. Criminal conviction cases. Let's dig a little bit deeper into that topic. One of the questions that comes up is, have you ever been arrested before? Ever? Not in the 5 years, not what you saw on the internet, ever. Did you get arrested here? Have you been arrested in the home country? Tell us what happened, right? And if you had, I mean, I just can't imagine. I don't think I've ever had a situation where the officer just says, oh, okay, thanks for telling me the truth, stamp of approval. No, they'll say, we want the records. We want to know what happened. Absolutely the most frustrating thing as an attorney is we'll have our staff and myself tell you 3 times over, bring your original court records to the interview. And for some reason, I don't know why, but people just forget, or they just don't bring them, but they will ask you for the original court records. And the most frustrating thing for me is we go to the interview, you don't bring the records. You'll have an opportunity. You'll have 87 days to go get those records, but it's just frustrating because it just delays the process. And there's no time limit for the officer to get back to you. It might be a situation where you might wait 3 months before you get that letter, or 2 months before you get that letter. And so bring your original court records to the interview. One question on the N400 is, have you ever committed a crime which you haven't been arrested for? And so it's a little tricky if you don't really listen to the question. I mean, but basically what they're saying is, did you ever commit a bad act, but then you never got caught for it? Please tell us. Volunteer that information to us, please. Just be mindful of that. I mean, that's one question that absolutely trips people up. And then, so they'll have an open-ended question and say, tell us what happened in the arrest. And this is where I tell my client, keep your answers short. Somebody asks you what time it is, it's 1:30. Not 1:30 p.m., Sacramento, California, at the law library, and a hot dog before I got here. No, keep it concise. The affidavit that you prepare should be concise. Don't ramble on. Tell them what happened, admit to it, and let the officer then ask the question. And usually there won't be any issues after that. And so again, in those criminal cases, if you have a conviction, you got to prove good moral character. So make sure after the copy of the green card, front and back, along with the check, include evidence of good moral character, an affidavit, taxes, pictures of the family, your college education, degrees, awards, letters of recommendations, 2 of them actually. And if they can be notarized, all the better. Personally, I think it's difficult to ask a favor for a letter of recommendation, let alone asking somebody to notarize it. But if somebody like a police officer or a doctor or a priest or a teacher or anybody that's got good standing in the community, if they could put it on some sort of letterhead, that's fantastic. And the letter just needs to say, I'm such and such, here's my address, here's my phone number. I've known Jane Smith for 5 years. I know her husband, they're a great family, they deserve to be a U.S. citizen. In the criminal cases, we'll say, yeah, I've sometimes people don't want to give their business out to other random people, that's fine. And so they can just have that general explanation. But some folks might say, I heard about his arrest, he made a dumb mistake, I've never had an issue with him, and he's a good citizen, and he deserves to be a U.S. citizen of the United States. So 2 letters of recommendations are always important as well. Standard questions. For some reason, out of the 100 questions, our clients always like to say, well, tell us what you think. What do you think is going to show up? And guess what questions are on there. And so even though I'm in the interview a lot of times with the client, I'm always jotting down the questions. Partly to test my own self and remember my own history lessons from high school, but just to make sure everything's clear on the record as well. So one thing I do see quite a bit is a lot of the questions that are on the 6520 exemption list. And by the way, that chart can be obtained directly from the USCIS website. And there'll be questions like, sometimes the first question, it usually is, what's the supreme law of the land? Or how many amendments does the Constitution have? Name one of the longest rivers in the United States. And the problem that we see with this is folks are so ridiculously nervous, they don't actually listen to the question. Take a deep breath. This isn't timed. Nobody's going to judge your intelligence if you take a second to think about the question and then answer. Sometimes I have professors miss these questions just because they want to just fire off the answer. So just be mindful of that. Remember, these questions are going to be asked at the beginning of the interview, and as you can see on the PowerPoint, those are the questions I see quite a bit, more than the others. For whatever it's worth, this last year and a half from 2020 to 2021, the question of who wrote the Federalist Papers, which I always take note of because I initially couldn't remember that. So that's come up many times, actually. So it's foolish to try to game and question, guess which one of these questions are coming up. But I just found that the 6520 exemption list on the USCIS website, those tend to be a lot of questions that we see. In my last presentation, a lot of the questions like, well, tell us a funny story as to what happened. And I think generally, they do offer a lot of good lessons. And so one of the points was, You're not out of the woods until after the oath ceremony. So we've had instances where we win this difficult interview, everything's good, we celebrate when we get that oath ceremony, and Joe Smith decides to go have a drink with his buddies and gets arrested right after the approval notice. One of the questions that you're going to be filling out at the oath ceremony is, have you ever been arrested after the ceremony? And we've had to honestly answer that. And one of the worst feelings in the world was getting a client sobbing and saying, I just got pulled out of the line and now I need a referral to a criminal attorney. And unfortunately, that's happened. So don't celebrate all the way until that U.S. passport comes in. And again, the divorce situation, surprises happen all the time. People get and people get thrown off by this issue all the time of, so what happened? What happened in the marriage? They don't care to be your best friend. They're asking you, well, you got your green card through marriage and now you're not together. Just confirm that there was no type of fraud, that this was a bona fide marriage. And so that is definitely something that comes up. And by the way, and I think I mentioned this earlier, they may talk to your ex-spouse and interview them and say, what was the date of separation? When did you guys when did you guys stop living together? And by the way, if you just happen to sign on that form and help your spouse out because you're still friends, you're okay. But under penalty of perjury, you have to tell us the date of separation. And they might interview neighbors. We've had that happen and say, was this spouse ever in this house? Ever? And so be mindful of that. Evidence of good moral character will save the day. We know that, and this is for the viewers that don't retain an attorney, have evidence of good moral character. The taxes, the pictures, the good letters of recommendations, the paychecks stubs, that kind of thing. Slow down and listen to the questions. One time we had a situation where a lady was just so nervous. She knew that the 15 questions that the officer asked of, have you ever been arrested? No. Have you ever had any issues with prostitution? No. Gambling? No. Terrorist activity in the past? No. All these questions. So the officer was asking, nice and easy. Have you ever been arrested? No. Have you ever been this? No. I mean, literally, the lady just kept on saying no, and didn't even listen to the question. And the officer said, ma'am, hold on. Do you even understand what I'm asking you? And the question was, have you ever been part of the Communist Party? No. She's like, do you understand what I'm telling you? She's like, no. And so it's just like, take a deep breath, listen to the question. Everybody sees these videos on what are the questions they're going to ask. They don't know. They know that you're just going to say no. But then now we have gotten officers that'll twist the sequence of questions. So a couple of months ago, one of the officers asked, "Do you promise to support the U.S. Constitution?" Now, if you're just trying to say no, and this is again for the audience that has limited English, so that's who we're speaking to right now. That's where the issue is. So you'll have an officer that'll say, question that you're supposed to say yes to. Do you support the U.S. Constitution? The answer is yes. If you don't, there's going to be problems. So just take it easy. Take a listen to the sequence of the questions. Don't forget your paperwork. Number one issue, people forgot their criminal records. People forgot their passport. This isn't a time to take the test. People think this is what the process is about. This is, I feel like as an attorney, and excuse the pessimism, but this is their last opportunity to catch any mistakes in your case or any problems in your case. So don't give them that opportunity. Let it be a 15-minute interview, a happy-go-lucky interview, and out you go. And that's roughly how long the process should take that day. It's 15 to 20 minutes. And this even includes the criminal cases. So if you prepare an application, you've prepared the affidavits, the officers already see this. And so then it's just a formality of asking you the questions, and then off you go. Enjoy the ceremony, because recently it's been a situation where the ceremony is done in a car, in a parking lot. There's not this fun kind of get together the way it used to be before COVID. So if you've gone through the process, and a lot of our clients, they've gone through hell and back, and now they finally got to those ceremony, and you didn't get arrested before that, enjoy the day, because you deserve it. So those are just the basic parts of the naturalization process. And if we want to open it up to questions, it's certainly do so.
Could you talk a bit about visa overstays?
Yeah, sure, Marie. We deal with that quite a bit. So if you were on a visitor visa, or you were on a student visa and you overstayed, for this topic, it may not be as relevant, just because if you overstayed a visa and then you married a U.S. citizen, you obtained a green card, typically that's not going to come up in your naturalization interview. So that does not come up in actually in any of the interviews I've ever been to. And I'd say a big majority of my clients are visa overstays. But you've already won that battle at the green card stage. So that question mostly isn't asked at the naturalization process. It is asked at the green card level. So if you are a visa overstay, one way they'll forgive that is if you married a U.S. citizen, or if your child is a U.S. citizen over the age of 21. So as an immediate relative, that visa overstay can be forgiven.
And with that, we thank you very much for your participation and look forward to having you utilize the Law Library's services.